In 1999, someone slipped past the security of the U.S. Department of Defense and downloaded software that helped keep astronauts alive aboard the International Space Station. The government called it a national security threat worth $1.7 million. The person who did it called it harmless exploration, and he was 16 years old. His name was Jonathan James. He broke into the Pentagon and NASA from his bedroom, and 9 years later, the same justice system that had made an example of him would come knocking again. This time, it would cost him his life. Jonathan Joseph James was born on December 12, 1983, and grew up in Pinecrest, an affluent suburb south of Miami. His mother was a homemaker, and his father worked as a professional computer programmer. By age 6, Jonathan was already using the family computer. He quickly outpaced the machine's basic setups, learning to bypass parental controls before most kids his age had mastered typing. By his early teens, Jonathan was teaching himself the C programming language and the fundamentals of Unix from source code. He eventually wiped the Windows operating system entirely from the family workstation to install Linux. This obsessive, round-the-clock computer use caused immediate friction at home. When his parents finally confiscated his computer to force a break, the 13-year-old ran away from home, returning only after negotiating his return to the keyboard. Online, Jonathan adopted a new identity, C0MRAID, spelled with a 0. His father, despite having spent 20 years working in computer programming, later admitted that he could not do what his teenage son was doing on a computer. Yet the family never saw Jonathan's interest as destructive. In his room hung a laminated photograph of the Apollo 16 mission, signed by astronaut Charlie Duke, with the inscription, "Dare to Dream." His early exploration was driven by technical curiosity rather than a desire to cause harm. When he began probing local networks, including the Miami-Dade public schools and a BellSouth gateway, he left systems intact. When investigators later examined his network intrusions, they noted that he deleted no files, planted no viruses, and changed no passwords. In some instances, Jonathan even emailed system administrators directly to alert them to security vulnerabilities. He wanted to understand how these networks worked, and he wanted the people running them to know they were exposed. Between August 23rd and October 27th, 1999, Jonathan directed his attention toward local networks, breaching a BellSouth telecommunications gateway and the Miami-Dade County public school system. Neither incident resulted in reported financial damage. When questioned about the intrusion, a BellSouth spokesperson shrugged the incident off, publicly calling it nothing serious. Later, rumors circulated that the teenager had altered his own school records during the breach, but investigators never found evidence of this, and the claim was excluded from the official federal case. These early incursions remained localized, proving to be minor trials of skill rather than deliberate acts of sabotage. Yet they demonstrated that his technical curiosity was expanding beyond personal workstations, setting his sights on much larger institutional systems. In late June 1999, 15-year-old Jonathan directed his attention to the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Using his home computer, he bypassed security protocols, installed a persistent backdoor on a server, and penetrated 13 NASA computers. Once inside, he located and downloaded highly sensitive, proprietary source code. This stolen software governed the environmental control systems for the International Space Station, specifically regulating the temperature and humidity inside the crew's living quarters. Although possession of this source code did not give him operational control or the ability to command the physical life support systems of the space station, federal authorities viewed the theft as a severe threat to national infrastructure. The Department of Justice later valued the exfiltrated software at $1.7 million. Upon discovering the intrusion, NASA officials made the decision to shut down the affected Marshall Space Flight Center networks entirely for 21 days. The 3-week outage disrupted routine telemetry uploads and delayed critical software updates. To completely purge the systems of any backdoor access, replace compromised hardware, and verify network security, the agency relied heavily on external support. The contractor labor and emergency assessment costs alone totaled $41,000. This forced NASA to treat the incident as a major federal crisis, demonstrating why the government response would quickly turn aggressive. Jonathan later explained that his motives were educational, not malicious. He had been studying the C programming language and simply wanted to see how professional developers structured their software. When he examined the NASA code, he was unimpressed, calling the program crappy and pointing out that several files would not even compile. In his eyes, the government's high valuation of the software was completely absurd, representing a fundamental misunderstanding of what he had actually downloaded. Federal prosecutors saw the intrusion through a national security lens, framing the theft of space agency software as a threat to critical infrastructure. Yet the reality of the breach was far less severe than the official rhetoric suggested. The stolen source code did not give Jonathan control of the International Space Station. Reading code on a home computer is a world away from sending commands to orbital spacecraft or altering life support systems. This disconnect placed the teenager's reckless curiosity in direct conflict with a federal system designed to combat cyber warfare, setting a precedent for how the state would handle youthful exploration in the internet age. In August 1999, 2 months after accessing NASA, the 15-year-old redirected his focus to a server in Dulles, Virginia. This system belonged to the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, the Pentagon division responsible for monitoring nuclear, chemical, biological, and conventional weapons threats. By accessing an internal router, Jonathan used a hidden backdoor and a packet sniffer to capture data moving through the agency's network. Federal investigators later reported that this sniffer intercepted over 3,300 email messages. Along with the message traffic, the program harvested 19 usernames and passwords, including 10 military credentials. But how Jonathan got inside remains a point of contention. While prosecutors framed the intrusion as a sophisticated attack, other technical reviews suggested Jonathan had not written an exotic exploit. Instead, he may have found a pre-existing backdoor, essentially stepping through an unlocked door. To federal authorities, the technical details mattered less than the scale. A teenager in his bedroom had intercepted the communications of an agency tracking weapons of mass destruction, moving the case from property trespass to a direct concern of national security. On January 26, 2000, just weeks after his 16th birthday, Jonathan was awakened by his mother telling him the FBI was at the front door. Federal agents from the FBI, the Department of Defense, and NASA, accompanied by local Pinecrest police, swarmed the family home. They spent hours searching the residence, ultimately seizing 5 personal computers, a Palm Pilot, a stack of compact discs, and a Star Trek book. After questioning the teenager for hours, the agents left without making an arrest. Nearly 8 months of silence followed. Then, on September 21, 2000, Jonathan entered Miami federal court and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of juvenile delinquency. The Department of Justice presented the case as the first federal conviction of a juvenile for cybercrime. Prosecutors made it clear that had he been tried as an adult, the charges would have carried a prison term of 10 years or more. The exact sequence of his punishment remains a point of confusion in popular accounts, which often describe house arrest followed by probation and a failed drug test. Federal records show the court initially imposed house arrest and a ban on internet use, which later resulted in a 6-month term in a juvenile detention facility after he violated probation by accessing a computer. Attorney General Janet Reno and local federal prosecutors publicly used Jonathan's case as a warning to other young hackers. For the government, it was an exercise in deterrence. For Jonathan, the cost was immediate. His father later observed that the detention left his son idle and deeply regretful, ending his interest in hacking forever. In the mid-2000s, the South Florida hacking scene shifted from adolescent exploration to highly organized retail theft. At the center of this underground network was Albert Gonzalez. Arrested in 2003 for using fake cards at an ATM, Gonzalez avoided prison by becoming a paid Secret Service informant. While working for the government, he secretly orchestrated a massive identity theft ring under the name Get Rich or Die Trying. The operation relied on a tight-knit crew. Christopher Scott served as a mutual link to local hackers, working alongside Damon Toey and a coder named Stephen Watt. Their method was straightforward. Armed with laptops and antennas, they drove through retail parking lots, a practice called war driving, to exploit weak store Wi-Fi networks. Once inside, they deployed custom packet sniffers to harvest credit card data. Their primary target was the TJX companies, owner of TJ Maxx and Marshalls. Beginning around 2005, they quietly drained payment databases. By the time TJX disclosed the breach in January 2007, initial filings revealed 45.6 million compromised cards, with later court estimates reaching 90 million. When the network collapsed, the courts handed down historic sentences. Scott received 7 years, Toey 5, and Watt 2 years, plus $171 million in restitution. Gonzalez was sentenced to 20 years. A federal complaint filed during the investigation introduced a mysterious figure, an unindicted CKO conspirator identified only by the initials JJ. Investigators tracking the ring began connecting these letters to Jonathan James. They pointed to a 2004 Office Max Wi-Fi intrusion in Florida, an incident that allegedly linked James to Christopher Scott. Reports also emerged claiming that this JJ had opened a physical mail drop to receive stolen goods for Albert Gonzalez. Through this chain of associations, moving from Gonzalez to Scott, and then toward James, federal agents built a theory of involvement. Yet another explanation existed. The initials JJ may instead have referred to Stephen Watt, who used the alias Jim Jones. Jonathan James was never charged in the TJX case, and no public evidence tied him to the TJX intrusion itself. Despite the intense focus of the Secret Service, the identity of JJ remained highly contested, with many pointing to Stephen Watt, whose Jim Jones moniker fit the initials perfectly. James was never charged in the TJX case, and no public evidence tied him to the intrusion. The initials JJ remained just a set of letters in a government filing, with nothing more proven in a court of law. By early May 2008, Jonathan was 24 years old, unemployed, and living in his childhood home in Pinecrest. He struggled with severe clinical depression and had long since retired from hacking. On May 7, 2008, the old case returned when the Secret Service executed a series of coordinated raids, swarming his home, his brother's residence, and his girlfriend's apartment in a sweep targeting the TJX breach. The search turned up no evidence connecting Jonathan to the retail theft, and agents left a legally owned firearm untouched in the house. Yet they did discover older, handwritten notes showing that Jonathan had previously considered taking his own life. Though he was never charged, reading the federal subpoena and learning about Albert Gonzalez's history as an informant deeply unsettled him. He became convinced that prosecutors would use his past to make him a scapegoat. A neighbor's story about a tracking device under his car fueled later theories, but it remained an unproven rumor. On May 18, 2008, less than 2 weeks after the Secret Service raided his home, 24-year-old Jonathan James died by suicide. He left behind a 5-page handwritten note addressed to his family. Alongside personal computer passwords and final messages, the document contained a devastating statement. He had no faith in the American justice system. James explicitly denied any involvement in the TJX wireless network intrusion, explaining that he chose to die free rather than spend years in prison for a federal crime he maintained he did not commit. To James, the note described a profound, exhausting loss of control, framing his death as the only remaining way to reclaim it. His father kept the 5-page letter completely private for more than a year before sharing it with Wired magazine in 2009. The official coroner's ruling was suicide. If you or someone you know is struggling or going through a difficult time, please know that help is always available. You can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Subscribe to our channel for more investigative documentaries. Stephen Heyman's role leading the Boston end of the TJX investigation later drew intense scrutiny when he oversaw the federal prosecution of internet activist Aaron Swartz. This administrative overlap made both cases central to public criticism regarding overzealous cyber prosecution. The broader environment was an aggressive campaign in the late 1990s and the 2000s using the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and federal wiretap laws. Young, highly capable offenders were repeatedly targeted as deterrent test cases, with officials publicly describing the James case as a turning point in federal enforcement. Among peers like Kevin Mitnick, Kevin Polson, Adrian Lamo, and Albert Gonzalez, James is remembered as a cautionary tale about prosecutorial overreach and the human cost of a justice system prioritizing deterrence over rehabilitation. The legacy of Serum Raid exposes the terrifying friction between an unyielding state and the fragile lives caught in its gears. Today, as digital prosecutions intensify, we must ask if we are securing systems at the cost of our humanity. If you or someone you know is struggling, please call or text 988 for support. Subscribe for more investigative documentaries.